So I'm going to ask the question that David asked at the beginning. So who here is using Google Analytics? Such a small number. Is anyone here using other sort of analytics tools? Is anyone here using Omniture, Web Trends, Core Metrics, Whoopra, Yahoo Web Analytics? No? Okay. All right, so what I'm going to cover is, so when I was asked to speak today, and I attended previous GTUG meetups as well, sorry, let me just get you something going. I know it's been a fairly technical audience, so I didn't want to come here and talk about the business aspects of Google Analytics too much, because I knew all our previous talks would be around that. So what I'd like to do is to cover like how Google Analytics can benefit the digital developer out there. So I want to know how many of you in here are developers? How many of you in here don't consider yourself to be developers but like to code? Would-be developers, all right. How many of you here are working at a startup or working with, you know, sort of an Ajax application or something like that? Okay, so nice to see more hands up in the air there. So basically what I'm going to cover today is how Google Analytics can help you track your websites and track your applications out there. I like these to be interactive, so feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions, or we can leave it to the end, I don't mind. Okay, so what I'm going to cover today very briefly is like why Google Analytics for the startup. So before I joined Google, I've been with Google for 3 years. Before that, I was at a series of startups before I joined Google in Australia. And we started with one of the projects I was on, we started using Google Analytics around 2006, when it wasn't as advanced as it is today. But just by implementing that into our application, it opened up so much information that it helped us optimize the application to bring in more traffic, bring in more usage. And if it had been a bit more successful, we probably could have used that data to help us with funding and investing as well. So why Google Analytics? Then go on to talk about how Google Analytics works for those of you who are curious to know how all that information gets into Google Analytics. Then I want to spend some time covering how you would measure your applications using Google Analytics. So whether it's a web application, whether it's a mobile application or a desktop application, we can look at the different options there are to get data from there into Google Analytics. There was a question about taking the data out of Google Analytics, so you can export reports from the interface, but we also have a data export API as well. So I want to show that to you very quickly too, for you to see the potentials that you can have by pulling the data out of it. And then leave you with a few resources so you can go away and try out these things on your own. Okay. So why Google Analytics? And it's a good question. I really like the product because it really covers a lot of aspects of measurement. So the answer to this question is really about what do you need from the analytics tool, right? It covers so much that it really is able to cover everybody's needs. The way I look at it though is that if this is your website out here, or this would be your web application, Google Analytics collects information around 3 key areas. So the first is how are people reaching your site or your application? And then once they're on there, how are they actually behaving with the content? How are they engaging with it? What do they like? What do they not like? So what feature sets should you be focusing on? What shouldn't you be focusing on? And then probably more importantly, what's causing them to leave altogether, right? Because hopefully you want them having a positive experience with your site and your application. So we want to understand what's causing them to leave. And so around these 3 key areas, Google Analytics collects about 125 or so standard metrics and dimensions. But you know that can be overwhelming in itself to wade through all those metrics. So what we actually do is we categorize it. So when you log into Google Analytics and you look at the tool, on the left-hand side there you see a menu. And what we've really done is to categorize all of these things into these key items that you see here. But the way I like to look at this is that if you look at these menu items, these categories, it's really helping you to tell the story of your website or your application. If you were to write a book about your website, let's say it becomes a success in 2 years' time, fingers crossed, and you're writing your bestseller on how you made it a success, the data here can help you write that story. So the visitors reports are really all about who's your audience, right? Who's coming to your website, and you get to learn everything you need to know about these important characters in the story. So David showed you a few examples here of the reports you can get in the visitors reports. I won't spend too much time there, but it's interesting to see, for example, where in the world your visitors are coming from. Sometimes you'll create an application or a site and you think your audience is in Singapore, but it'll be nice to suddenly find out that actually you've suddenly got a global reach. We've got other reports in there, like the languages report. So this shows you all the languages that the browsers have been set to when they come and visit your website. So this is really great for seeing that, if you need to internationalize your product to your website, what are the languages that you need to be focusing on? And down here as well, we have more specific lower level data around the version of browsers and operating systems that are being used to visit your website. And so if you needed to know, all right, do we need to invest in HTML5 or do we need to invest in a mobile application, this sort of information will help you decide whether you should or not. We have the traffic sources reports as well, and this shows you about how are people actually reaching your website. So what led them to your website or your application. And so the reports here are very useful to understand how are people finding about your website, and whether, if you're investing in various different marketing channels, whether they're working for you. So who here is spending a lot of time on SEO on their website? Just one person? Wow, okay. All right, so what are the rest of you doing to drive traffic to your website? Probably digital marketing. But if you're investing in SEO, these reports will be very useful to you because they allow you to see which search engines are driving traffic to your website, and more importantly, what keywords are driving traffic there. So if you're investing on, say, the keyword sprockets, but you never see it in your list of keywords, then you know your SEO isn't working, right? So if you're working with an SEO agency, you go up to them and say, well, shape up or ship out. We'll handle this on our own. Then we've got content reports. So this is really about what people did on your site. So once they got there, what did they start doing? So we've got a lot of great reports in there, about which pages people spent a lot of time on, or which pages did people land on and just hate it and leave the site completely. So for you, you're trying to optimize the user experience on your website, this sort of information allows you to see, what is it they like and dislike about your site. Identify the things they dislike and improve on it or remove it from your site. And then we have goals in e-commerce. As David mentioned, this is something that's really important. Every site, every application out there has a set of objectives. And you can define these as goals in Google Analytics. And under Analytics, you can create profiles, and you can have up to 20 goals per profile. So I say it's a waste not to use all 20 of them. So every site probably has a major goal, right? So you want to sell something, you want somebody to sign up to a newsletter. But you can also track those micro goals as well. So you want somebody spending 5 minutes on your website, that could be a goal. You want somebody clicking out to your Twitter feed, that could be a goal. You want somebody clicking out to your Facebook group, that could be a goal. And so these are all things you should be tracking. And the good thing about Google Analytics, it can tell you every time these objectives are met. And more importantly, it can tell you the types of visitors who are triggering these desired actions. And then you can use that information to try and leverage those visitors even more. Okay, and then finally we also have a new set of reports called the intelligence reports. And I really love these because what it does is on a daily basis it tells you what has changed significantly in your traffic in the last 24 hours. So for any of you who's had the boss ask you what's changed in the last 24 hours, where have there been the significant shifts, you would have to previously pull a lot of data from Google Analytics, a lot of Excel spreadsheets, a lot of number crunching, and you might get the answer out to your boss 4 or 5 days later. With this, you can actually get it in 4 or 5 seconds. And the great thing about this is instead of spending your time on figuring out where you should be taking action, you spend all of that time taking action on this information. So this can tell you like where data peaked, when did traffic suddenly change from the UK, did you get more revenue coming in from Dallas, Texas, or something like that. and then you can go in and investigate why did that happen. And maybe it was something organic, maybe something viral happened with your brand, and you can leverage that and take advantage of that. Okay, so you've seen a lot about Google Analytics, and one of the questions I always get is, how does it work? And when I speak to a non-technical audience or non-technical people, I just say, it's magic, it just works. And admit it, and don't worry about it, and just go access the reports and work with the data. So the way Google Analytics works is we put a standard bit of JavaScript code on every web page on your website or your web application. And recently we just released what we call the asynchronous tracking code. And most of you have probably been exposed to what we call our traditional GA.js tracking code. And so I just want to give you a brief a reason for why we moved to this asynchronous type of code. And hopefully, if you're already running analytics, to inspire you to run home now and change over to the asynchronous tracking code. So with the traditional style of loading up GA.js, it was actually non-asynchronous. So what that meant was, so this is a screenshot from Chrome Developer Tool. So it shows us how resources are being loaded on a web page as it's being loaded. And that red line there represents when the browser triggers the load event. So what it essentially means is that everything is finally rendered on the page, and now the user's ready to interact with it. So traditionally what would have to happen is you would have to load up all your resources, all your scripts, before the page could then be rendered for the user. And so in the traditional way of loading up Google Analytics code, you'd have to wait for it to load up, and then the load event is triggered, and then the user can use it. Usually that's not much of a problem because the code only takes a few milliseconds to download and trigger. But sometimes if you're in a country with low latency or low bandwidth, or something's happened on the network, your ISP's acting up, it could take a long time for all these scripts to download. Not just the GA scripts, but every other script that you're downloading, maybe your jQuery library and so on. And so this could actually affect the page load time, and in turn affect the user experience for the site. So with the asynchronous tracking code, what actually happens is that the code is loaded asynchronously. So it's loaded in parallel with the rest of the page loading as well. So here in this example, what we see is that the page the load event is triggered, but at the same time the Google Analytics code is still loading in the background. So what it means is that it's a few milliseconds sooner before your users get to interact with your site or your page, which is great because it means they start using your application sooner rather than later, and they don't get frustrated with slow load times. So how does this asynchronous tracking code work? So who here is curious to find out? This will let me know if I go over this very quickly or I spend a bit of time on it. A couple of people. Oh, okay, more people. All right, great. So this is your standard tracking code. You go into your Google Analytics account, you go to the settings page, you'll get the snippet of code, you just copy and paste it into your site. This is the standard code where you set your account ID and then you say, hey, track the page view that just occurred. If you do any more complex tracking, where you may be tracking across multiple domains or subdomains, or you may be doing e-commerce tracking, you need to customize the code a little, and all those customizations would appear here. There'd be additional lines. But the crux of the asynchronous loading is actually happening here. So what happens is when the browser sees this snippet of code, over here it's creating a little stack or just an array. So this is just an empty array, and then you're pushing you're queuing a lot of JavaScript commands into that array. And then what happens here is you're actually executing an anonymous function in JavaScript, and this function is actually inserting a script call within the DOM. And it's just making a call to GA.js, which is the standard Google Analytics tracking library. Now, if we look here as well, you see here that it dynamically determines whether to call our tracking library from our regular web servers or from our secure web servers. So the nice thing about this, if your page jumps back and forth between HTTP and HTTPS, you don't have to worry about which version of the code you call up. This will actually switch dynamically between the two libraries. So again, all you need is this one piece of tracking code and apply it uniformly across your entire website. The problem was before, when our old urchin.js code, you had to manually specify HTTPS when you're on a secure page. So a lot of people would forget that. And so when the page was loading and then the browser had to load up ga.js and had to pull it from a non-secure server, the browser would pop up a warning saying, hey, you're downloading a resource from a non-secure server, which used to scare a lot of people. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. And then with the asynchronous loading part, the magic is actually here in this snippet of code. So we're setting the async attribute for the script tag to true. And this is actually something that's unique to HTML5. A lot of browsers are now supporting this. Some aren't, unfortunately, but those browsers are kind of becoming extinct. So at least what this does is for browsers that support HTML5 features and support the async attribute, it will download and execute the script in parallel to the rest of the page. For traditional browsers that don't support this, then it will ignore this and it will load up the code as per usual, and it may block the rest of the loading until it loads up ga.js. But it shouldn't be a significant block, it'd be a quick update. And then what happens is basically once the ga.js library finally loads up, it goes and looks for this stack, for this GAQ array. And then it reads through the array, looks at all the commands that you've queued up, and it executes it. And then it actually replaces the array with something else so that after ga.js is loaded up, if you add any more calls to GAQ, it actually executes immediately. So it's kind of keeping a watch on this stack or array. Any questions there? I probably went a little too overly technical there. No?
So
Okay.
why don't we put the async virtual attribute
In the script tag itself.
in the whole GA.js?
So here what we're doing is we're just dynamically loading the script. So and then we're just setting the attribute sort of programmatically here. So we're just doing this here as a matter of best practice. We could hard code this into the script definition, but this is just a lot cleaner. Okay, so how does analytics work? So David went through it quite well, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. So essentially you've got a user sitting in a browser. They're requesting a web page off your servers, and the server sends back the page. On the page, you've got somewhere there up in your head tag the analytics tracking code. And then part of that code says, give me the ga.js library. So this is a library that sits on the Google Analytics servers that has all the logic for Google Analytics. And why we store it on our servers is that as we push out changes, it's easier to push it out on our servers, and then the web page can just dynamically fetch it. But the ga.js file is cached as well, so every time somebody requests a web page, they shouldn't be requesting a new copy of ga.js in order to save you bandwidth and loading time. Then we serve up ga.js. Then the functions start to run, so the crux of it is track page view, which essentially triggers off the whole process where it ends up reading all the information about the visit, reads and writes any necessary cookies that need to be written. And then, this is where everyone goes, how does it work, right? How does Google Analytics know about this information? Because everything's running on the user's browser. You as a site owner, you never get to see this on your servers unless you're running your own server logs. What actually happens is that the analytics code instructs the browser to send across a request for a GIF file from the Google Analytics servers. And the request looks something like this. Shall I give you a minute here to read through it and decipher it? So don't worry about it. It's, if you want, you can go to our code.google site and you'll see you can get the full documentation on this. But it sends across all this information it's collected in the request parameters for the GIF hit. And so this gets logged on the server logs on the Google Analytics servers, and then these logs are processed on anywhere from a 3-hour to a 24-hour basis. And these logs are read, written, sliced and diced, processed, and then you get to see the data in your reports. And just to close the loop, our server actually just serves a 1-pixel file, so the browser doesn't collapse on itself expecting a a good code. And so I'll leave the slide here. This is for you to read later on, but basically you can decipher these requests and see the sort of information that's being sent across. So we, the JavaScript will sniff out attributes of, oops, sorry. So the JavaScript will sniff out attributes of your browser, such as the screen resolution, what language is the browser set to, do they have Java and Flash on their machines, and then basic information on what's the host name, the page title, and the account ID that the site is associated with. And so now when the data gets sent across, every hit is associated with what we call a web property ID. So that's this UA dash number here. And each web property ID is essentially associated with a unique database. So under your account, you can have multiple web property IDs, and you can think of those as almost like multiple unique data tables under your account. And so what then happens on a regular basis is that our Google Analytics processors will go through each of your unique databases, process it through its various algorithms, and then write out the data to your various profiles. The profiles essentially being your reporting profiles or your reporting setups there. So that's essentially how Google Analytics works from a traditional desktop browser perspective. We also have mobile tracking as well. So the challenge with desktop tracking here is the fact, if you look at this, it requires JavaScript first of all, so the browser needs to be able to download ga.js, interpret it, execute it. And then if you look at the way Google Analytics works, it also requires cookies as well to be able to track visitors uniquely across sessions. So if you have a device that doesn't execute JavaScript or that doesn't like cookies, then suddenly you're running blind with these types of visitors because Google Analytics can never run on those devices and therefore can never give you any data. So the biggest culprit of this tended to be WAP mobile devices. And so Jean basically before said it's a WAP world. And what it meant was if there were a lot of users using WAP devices coming to your website, you didn't know about it through Google Analytics. Thankfully this changed back in October. We released WAP tracking codes. And this actually slightly changed the model of Google Analytics because no longer was it about browser to our server communication. It suddenly became about your server communicating back to our servers, saying these are the mobile traffic we're receiving on our servers. So how it works is that right now we provide you with 4 snippets which you can get through your analytics setup screen interface. Sorry, 4 libraries of snippets. So if you're running a mobile web server with PHP, Perl, JSP, or ASP, we give you some standard libraries. You just copy and paste that code into your server rendering pages. So let me just skip across here. So this is where you would find it. So you can select, right, I'm building a site for a mobile phone. You don't have to get any specialized tracking if a majority of your users, say, are coming from an iPhone or an Android device, because those devices are higher end. They have browsers that execute, understand JavaScript, and that store cookies as well. So if you want to track traffic from those devices, you don't have to worry about anything. The standard implementation works. But it's when you're working with WAP devices we need to start customizing our code. So here I can go into my setup screen. I can say, right, I'm building a site, especially for a mobile phone. I'm using a PHP server, and then it will give you all the code. All you need to do is copy and paste it into your tracking, into your rendering files there. So let's have a quick look at the PHP code snippet. How many of you here are PHP developers? Only a few, okay. Well, for the rest of you, I'm sorry, but hopefully you can understand the logic. So if you're using any of the other platforms, you can just use the library and follow the same logic. So on your server, you will have a piece of code that will render the output for the mobile device. So in there, in that rendering, you would actually make a call to an image file. And the path to the image file is actually a PHP file that sits on your server. And so we have the path. We have a function that will even generate the path for you. So when I receive your page on my browser, my browser will request this image, which will then actually go. This Google get image URL. The path for it is defined here. And so here you can see it's doing a few things. It's inserting your Google account ID, your analytics account ID. It's putting in a unique user ID in there, giving you information about the referrer, if there was a query string that led to your site, all that is captured in there. And then when I actually request that image, then it gets, make a call to send request to Google Analytics. And what it actually does, it takes, again, encapsulates all these parameters, all this information. And remember that UTM GIF file I showed you before, the request that's made for that. It basically mirrors that and sends it across to the server. So instead now of your phone sending all the information across to the Google servers, what it does is it sends it across to your application server, and then your application server sends that information across to Google Analytics. And that's how we get across, or get over the issue of working with devices that don't support JavaScript or cookies right now. So who here is working with mobile applications or mobile sites? A few of you. So the good thing here is now that, before there used to be a huge gap where Google Analytics couldn't track these types of sites, and people would have to look for alternatives and be using Google Analytics for their own website and then this alternative for their mobile website. So now you can actually marry all those together into one interface. Okay, so now I want to kind of walk you through the various Google Analytics options that are out there for non-browser solutions. So a lot of you here, I'm sure, are working with applications or building applications that are not your traditional website, right? It's not about going from page A to B to C. It's about working with interactive elements on the page. So, as I said, traditional Google Analytics really was very much page view based. It was about going from A to B to C. Google Analytics would tell you, yes, that user went from A to B to C, but what happened when we were working with a site that really just was a one-page app or one-page site? You went to one single URL, that URL really never changed, and there's really never a refresh. So I'm using Google Maps here as an example. So if we look at this as an example of a typical Ajax website, this is what you'd see. And who here has used Google Maps? And if not, everyone's putting your hands up. I know some of you are lying in here. All right, so if you're using Google Maps, you know as you're interacting with Google Maps, it's not really loading up new pages, right? It's just loading up new content or new widgets or new UI elements within the same page. So with traditional Google Analytics, you wouldn't get much information. All you would know is that people went to maps.google.com. That's it. But for you as the Maps developer, it wouldn't be much use. You want to know, what are they actually doing on my website? And so what would enter here event tracking, which is fairly new, but not so new anymore. It's about 1.5 years old. And what it allows you to do now is to start to track events on your site or your application as they happen. So as the user interacts with your UI, you can trigger calls to Google Analytics telling it, hey, somebody just clicked on a marker, or hey, somebody just referred this to a friend. So all you would need to do, if it was a JavaScript Ajax application, for example, is to kind of capture those events as they happen. So your browser throws off events, capture those events, and then send off a request to Google Analytics. So the way our track event function works is actually fairly simple. As an event happens, so let's say it's an on-click event in JavaScript or Ajax, you would actually call our GAQ push function. You would make a call to the track event function, which is doing the bulk of the work. And then we have 4 variables that you would also send to the function. And the way these work, the category variable is really describing the group of objects on your application that you're tracking. So you can have up to as many categories as you want. So So let's say for this particular application, let's say I'm working on Google Maps. One of the categories of objects I want to see, understand how being interacted upon are the markers on the map. And so that category could be markers. And then the next variable is action. And so action is really describes the type of action that was taken on the objects that we're tracking. So in this case, the action would be a click. But the actions can also be drag. Maybe I drag the marker somewhere else. So you can have as many actions as you want per category. Then we have two optional values here. So we have label. So you can actually give the action a bit more context. So maybe it's useful for me to know, all right, how many people clicked on a particular marker. But I might also want to know what was the marker that they clicked on as well. So then you can also provide that information with the optional label there. So it gives it a bit more additional context. So you say, oh, actually it was the marker for Google Singapore. And then you also have the optional value as well. So you can actually put a numerical piece of information with the data that you're tracking. In this context, it doesn't make much sense here to have some numerical information. But let's say you were tracking video plays, and you wanted to track how far into the video somebody proceeded before they stopped it or hit pause. In that case, you could intercept the action where they hit pause. You can read the timer, so you might see, oh yeah, they've gone 36 seconds in. And that's the value you can send in the numerical section there, 36 seconds. And so later on, you can go into your event tracking reports and see, okay, for this particular video, how long on average did somebody view it? And if you see that maybe the average is like 2 seconds, you might be like, oh, we don't have a strong enough hook at the beginning of the video to encourage them to watch much further in. Okay, so let's give you an example here. So this is actually off my site, not that it's getting much traffic, but one of the things when I was creating it is I put a lot of links out there to all the various different social media channels. And I know a lot of sites out there now do that, right? So I go to a lot of sites, it's like, click here to follow us on Twitter, click here to join our Facebook fan group, come here and watch our YouTube videos. The problem with Google Analytics on its own is it can't actually tell you when people leave your website where they're actually going to, right? So we can say, right, they left your site on this page, but we can't tell you where they went to. And if one of your goals is to say, build up your Twitter fan base, you also want to know how many times did people click on these links. So what you can do is use event tracking to actually track these outbound links and give you reports on them. So I'll show you how I implemented it on my site here. Essentially what I had was a bunch of these links. They were just unordered list elements in HTML. For each link, I encapsulated it in a LI element and I gave it a class. So I just called it social media link. And if you're familiar with jQuery, basically what I did was I just traversed through every link that had social media link as a class. And I said, whenever it's clicked, call the function track social media link. And then what happens is, let's say somebody clicks on the Twitter link here, that triggers this, which in turn calls the track social media link function. And this is all it is. It's just one line. I'm saying go find the GAQ stack and push to it the track event function. The category of events or the category of objects I want to track are my social media links. The type of action I want to track is the click on the link. And then I also want to give it a label. So the label I'm going to give it is actually the URL that they're going to. So not only will I find out, okay, in total how many links are being clicked on, I can also then break it down into which specific links did they click on as well. And so then when I go into my event tracking reports, I can go into my sort of event tracking overview. Here I see a breakdown of all the categories that I'm tracking, so all the groups of objects that I'm tracking. So I'm interested in my social media links. Then I can drill down into that and look at all the different types of actions I've been tracking on the social media links. In this case, all I'm tracking are clicks, but maybe you might want to track other sort of events as well. Maybe if it's a rich interactive site, maybe drag and dropping or minimizing or something along those lines. You can track all of that. I click into that, and then here is where I see the data that I really want to see, is who's clicking on what. And then this gives me some insight and some information into what should I be doing. So it was quite interesting for me to see. I just assumed people would rather go to Twitter or Facebook first. But it was interesting to see that people actually clicking more to my google.com profile or to my blog, which is quite useless because I haven't written anything there for about 2 years. To me, last night actually, I was seeing this, it was an eye-opener because I thought nobody visited my Google profile. And I probably had a lot of crap in there. So this gives me a bit of sense of urgency to go and clean up some of that information I have in there. And probably hide some of the photos that are showing up in there as well. So let's say you're building an app, you're trying to build up your brand on the various social networks that you're dealing with. This information gives you a lot of insight. So if your key focus is building up your Twitter followers, you see something like this and you go, oh, our Twitter followers are actually at number 5, only a few people are clicking through to this. What can we do to make this number even higher? So maybe you want to go back and highlight the follow me on Twitter link, or maybe you want to remove all the other links because it's confusing people. You only want them to go to one destination. Okay, so that's event tracking, and that's really the crux of then allowing you to be able to track your applications that are running on other platforms there. So if you go to code.google.com and then you go to analytics, you'll see we have a section called specialized tracking, and it walks you through tracking applications that are not traditional websites or web applications, and how you would get that information into Google Analytics. So before I mentioned mobile analytics, so one side of mobile analytics is tracking websites and regular sites. The other side of mobile analytics is actually now tracking your applications. Who has written an Android application? All right, I guess we don't have anyone from an Android user group here. And anyone tried your hand at an iPhone application? A few of you, all right, cool. So the nice thing with Google Analytics is back in October, we released SDKs for iPhone and Android. So if you're building applications for these platforms, now through your stores or your marketplace, you get some stats on how many people downloaded, installed, uninstalled your applications, but you're still running blind as to what are they doing in your application, which widgets are they playing with, which features are they using the most. And so using these SDKs, you can actually implement Google Analytics tracking into your applications and measure page views. So page views could be every time somebody loaded up your application. And more importantly, then track the events of your application as well. So who's interacting with which features? Should you be focusing time on these features or not? And a couple of sort of power user tips as you're implementing this. The nice thing about these libraries for Android and iPhone is you can control when these GIF hits are made across the network. So we usually recommend that you batch these hits up together, because if your application is constantly firing off hits to Google Analytics, it's going to run down the battery on your mobile device. So you can actually batch all these hits together and send them at regular intervals, maybe every 2 or 3 minutes, or once an hour or once a day, however frequently you need the information. And as your application makes HTTP requests for other data, maybe it's pulling in, bus schedule information, at that same time you can also send through your request, so you can piggyback on other HTTP calls to save on the connection overhead. And the nice thing about these tracking libraries as well is that they will keep tracking even when the user is offline. So they keep tracking the information, store it in the application, and next time they come online, it sends all that information across to Google Analytics. And if you have an Android application and you publish it on the Android marketplace, and you start to publicize your Android marketplace download link, you can also track these various channels too. So as you distribute links out, maybe you're doing a paid ad on Google Mobile Ads, or you're sending out a link on Twitter, or you're sending it out to your friends, you can actually put tags on the end to identify where these links came from. So maybe it was a paid ad from Google Mobile Ads, or maybe it was a Twitter campaign. and then Google Analytics can tell you which of these channels led through to somebody discovering your app in Android Marketplace and then actually installing that app on their mobile device. So it's really a powerful way to understand how are people discovering your apps and what more can you do so more users are discovering those apps. Okay, has anyone here written a Chrome extension? No? One person. All right. So does anyone here know what Chrome is? Who doesn't know what Chrome is? Okay, Chrome just means shiny, that's all. It's a pretty shiny browser, and recently Chrome's started allowing developers to write extensions for Google Chrome. So it's like Firefox apps or Firefox extensions, exact same thing for Chrome. A Chrome extension is essentially like a website or a web page running in its own little container. And the nice thing is because it's all JavaScript and HTML based, it also means that you can integrate Google Analytics into there as well. So all you need to do is that, that library I showed you, you just load it inside your Chrome extension page. You just call track page view, and that will show you how many times somebody viewed the interface of your extension. And then as they're interacting with your extension as well, you can call track events or event tracking to find out, what specific elements of your extension did they actually interact with. So the Chrome extension marketplace is great to see how many people downloaded and installed and rated your extension. But if you put Google Analytics in there as well, you can actually find out then how frequently are they using that extension and then which specific elements of that extension are they using. So as you go on to create Chrome extensions, as I'm sure you will, don't forget about Google Analytics to figure out who's using your extension and do they like it or not. How many of you here are Flash or Flex designers? Did you know you have Google Analytics for Flash and Flex? Yep. So if you're dabbling in Flash or you're thinking of dabbling in Flash, we actually have an open source library. It's just called GA for Flash, very originally named there. And all you need to do is it's just a library. You load it up into your development environment. I've never coded in Flash, so I can't give you too much more than this. But again, you load it in. From everything I've heard, it's very easy to use and implement. And again, the same basic model. You can track page views to understand how are people interacting with different pages of your content within your Flash or Flex application. And also you can use it then to also track events. So how are people interacting with your rich applications? Then there's Silverlight. So this one took me by surprise. Took a lot of people by surprise because, Google, Microsoft, people didn't expect there to be much partnership. So even I tweeted about this when it happened. I said, who saw that coming? And I don't think many people did. I heard rumblings about it amongst the analytics team, but I thought it's just people, dreaming. But the nice thing is that, the Silverlight team saw the importance of having a robust tracking solution, and Google Analytics being one of that, and being able to integrate that into their Silverlight libraries. And I think this is really a great story as well, because I think many people perceive Microsoft and Google to be enemies, but I think if anything, analytics brings everyone together. The reason I say this is that analytics is really, it's a tool that's for everyone. Even though it has the Google Analytics name, I've shown you today that it's not really tied to any Google product, right? It doesn't just only track users who come from Google AdWords. It doesn't only track users who come from a Google organic search. It tracks all your users. If you took the Google name out of it, it would still be analytics. It would give you all the information you need about every visitor to your website or application. And so no exception there with Silverlight as well. Nice thing about Silverlight, people write standalone desktop applications with Silverlight. That's also able to track it's able to track desktop applications there for you. Any questions? I know that's a lot. There's a lot of information here. We could spend the whole day on it, but I just really wanted to give you all the possibilities so that you could go back, go home, and explore the facets that you're interested in. Yes?
Here, if I create an application, that is going to talk to analytics and keep sending data.
Yeah.
So here there is a bandwidth limitation.
Okay, so yeah, the question is there a limitation on how much data you can send through to Google Analytics? And so that's a good question, a very valid one. So actually when you go to the code.google.com site, go to Analytics and you go to the Flash page, there's actually some advice there on what the limits are. Because if you were to try and track every little element, so we've seen people try and track mouse movement, and so you can imagine me moving my mouse from left to right, that's probably triggered about 150 calls. And you know, that was where somebody's getting very granular about every pixel that was being touched on their application. That sends a lot of information through to analytics, and there comes a point where our servers will start to reject too many hits from the same browser or the same user. And so what you need to do, read through the documentation, see what the advice is for the type of application that you're building, and limit the types of events that you're capturing. So usually people are well within reason, and they implement it well within reason, so there's no issue there. But if you have a video player and you want to track every second that the cursor moves down the progress bar, that's probably going to trigger too many hits from that user's machine. And so that's probably going to cause for some of these hits to be dropped from your tracking. So there won't be a case where like your account would be disabled or closed, but what would happen is there'd be a point where the data would just stop collecting for the day. And you may receive an email from your account administrator email saying that, hey, what's going on with your application? Something seems to be not quite right there. And these quotas or these limits are also on a per user basis, because the hits are triggered off the user's machine or the user's browser. So the rate limiting is based on a per user rather than per application or per site. Okay, any other questions? Okay. All right, so I'll move on to the last piece, which is our data export API. So for a long time, people have been asking for an API for Google Analytics, and we really didn't have one. And what people had to do was how David showed you, you set up a scheduled email. They would actually set up a scheduled email for the XML. It would go to some mailbox on their server, and they'd run a script that would take that XML data, parse it, and then integrate it into their systems. So this wasn't really very helpful, because the most frequent you could do was a daily scheduled email, which would show up sometime in the morning. And if they wanted real-time updates to their data, they couldn't really get it. And they would also have to define these reports well in advance. So it wasn't really very ideal. So halfway through last year, we introduced the Data Export API. And now what it allows you to do is programmatically, in real time, access your Google Analytics account and pull that data down in real time. Who here's played around with Google's other data APIs, the GData protocol, GData APIs? A couple of people, all right. So if you have experience, say, working with a Google Docs API or Spreadsheets API or other various GData APIs, it's actually very similar to that. We have a lot of client libraries already pre-written for you, so all you need to do is plug it into your application and just use it to call the various piece of data that you need for your application. So let me just go through it very quickly. So Google Analytics data is defined under two sort of buckets. We have dimensions and we have metrics. So the way I like to think about it is that metrics, so these things here, is anything that has a number associated with, right? So if you see digits, that's a metric. And then dimensions are anything, so like a page, for example, that has a lot of variable values that are usually represented in words. So the country, browser version, page name, these are all dimensions. And so with the Google Data Export API, you can actually start to pull these dimensions and metrics down the wire in real time as you need it for your own purposes. So you could be using the data to build your own dashboard. Maybe you have 5 different analytics applications and your boss doesn't want to be logging into 5 different applications. They say, just give me one report. So you can just pull this data through the API, integrate it into your dashboard, and there you go, you have it. Maybe you want to do something a little more creative. Maybe you want to build your own extension to Google Analytics, a standalone application. So you can pull that data in and show it represented in a different way. Maybe you want to take all your geo data and put it on top of Google Earth and have it rotating and spinning so your boss loves it and gives you a promotion later on because they think you're very smart. You got the globe to spin. So again, you can pull that data in real time and display it there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you we have an interactive samples page, which is great for familiarizing yourself with the export API. So let me show you where it is. Just resize that. So I hope everyone here is at least familiar with Google Code. Code.google.com, anything you need to learn about any of our technologies or APIs, it's all here. And if you go under More Products, scroll down and look for the big orange box, so that's Google Analytics. We come here, and then you want to click on the Docs link, and that gives you basically everything I've spoken about today, that's all here. All our different types of tracking, we got our specialized tracking, which I was talking about before. Scroll down here to the Data Export API, and click on Interactive Examples. And this actually really walks you through how your application would interact with the Analytics API as well. So the first thing you actually need to do is you need to log in and authorize yourself to the account. So the Google Analytics API, because you don't want to expose your API to the whole world, so you actually need to authenticate yourself. So you can log in as a user, and then you can get access to all the data that you as a user have access to in your Google Analytics account. So in my Google Analytics account, for example, as my personal Gmail account, it has access to all these accounts, and it has access to all these various profiles under those accounts. And so when I log in, so this uses our OAuth style of logging, authentication. So it redirects to Google accounts, which handles all the authentication. So it says, what do I want to log in as, which ID. Then it says, hey, the Google Analytics API is trying to access your Google Analytics data. Do you want to grant them access or not? So this application that you may be using, you get redirected to such a page, and it would say, do you want to give this application access to your data? Yes or no. If you don't trust the application, you can say deny access, and your data is safe. If you trust the application, you can say, all right, grant them access. All right, so it grants the access, and then I come back, and now it says I've logged in. And the first thing we could do is actually list all the accounts that I have access to. So we scroll down, and we have a code sample for retrieving your accounts. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Fairly straightforward. What we do is this is using our JavaScript SDK or JavaScript library. So a lot of the raw heavy lifting in the background has already been done for you. All we're doing is we're instantiating a new analytics service, and we give it sort of an application name to be associated with. And this is all code that's rendering the output, so let's not worry about it. And down the bottom here, this is all it is. We take our analytics service and we call the get account feed function. And that gives you all the details about all the accounts that the user has access to. So let's see what this looks like. Let's hit run. Yep, there we go. And so now this lists all the various accounts. Let me just reduce the font size for a minute. So you can see here on the left, it has all the accounts that I have access to. Under each account, it tells me all the various profiles I have access to, and then gives me all the unique IDs in case I need to pull that information. So let's say I want to pull information from my site. I need to know this table ID. That's going to be the unique database that I'm going to be pulling data from. So I'm just going to copy that. Scroll back up to the top. I'm just going to paste it in here so that all the interactive samples know to read off that database. And then we can start playing around with some of the samples. So, for example, we can look at the top pages by page views. So you might have a custom need to get in your dashboard, look at the top 15 pages, top pages sorted by the number of page views. So we look at the code here. let me execute the code first so you see what the output looks like. So I run it, it's running the code. I've told it I want it from my blog profile. And then here we go, so it gives me exactly what I need, the page title, the path to it as well, and then the number of page views. So I can see at a glance, all right, that's the data that I need. So let's see how this was actually done. So first thing again, we instantiate a new service. And then what we do is we actually point that service to a URL. The URL actually encapsulates our query. And if we look at the query, it's actually fairly straightforward. So we have an endpoint that we send the query to. We have a start date and an end date. So we say, hey, the data that we're calling, we actually want it to be between these two dates. So this is actually for data back in 2009. It's not really very useful to me. So I might actually extend this all the way till today, right? So 2010, I believe we're in June already, and then today. And then we say the dimensions I want, the source and medium, and the entrance and bounces. Oh, what are we doing? We're at the wrong... Oh, we're at another example, sorry. Well, anyway, let's look at this then. So this example here is looking at all our content by bounce rate. So who's leaving our content after our site after viewing one page. So you say the dimensions I want. So remember, the dimensions are anything that sort of have a textual description to it. Is the source. So how did they get there? Was it Google? Was it direct? Was it a bookmark and the medium? And then the metrics I want are the number of entrances and the number of bounces. And we'll sort our data in reverse order, so that's why we have the negative sign there, by the number of entrances. And give us 10 results, but maybe I want the top 20, so I'll change that to 20. And the ID of our data table is the table ID that I stuck above. Scroll down here, once you get the results, this function will render all that information. And then down here is where we request the data. And we say, once you get the data, call the callback function, which happens to be this, and it does all the output, so I can run it. So hopefully get all the data for the last year and a half. Okay, so here we go, right, all the various sources. I don't know what, that's friend connect there. The various mediums under the sources, you see the number of entrances, ordered in reverse order, and the visits as well. And of course the bounce rate would be useful too, since we're looking for the bounces. So I could actually modify this query to look for other information as well. So what information can I get? So let me open another tab. And so this piece of document here lists all the various dimensions and metrics that I can call. All right, so if we go and look back at this code snippet, where's it gone? So go back to code. So I'm looking at source, medium, entrances, and bounces. I might want to do more around entrances and bounces. Maybe I want to know unique visits or unique visitors. So what we can do is look up what are they. So visitor metrics, we've got bounces, entrances. Maybe I also want to know the visits associated with this as well. Where did that go? So that's here, GA visits. It explains to you what that metric is about as well. So it's the total number of visits over a selected dimension. So I go back here, and I just modify this line to say also give me visits. Oh, which is already there. Let's just add it here as well. Let's call it visits 2. Want to read the value of visits too. So when you call the data, you get an XML feed or a modified atom feed, and you'd say it's an entry object, and you'd say get the value of the GA visits element, and they'll give us a number. And then what we want to do is output it here. Okay. And hopefully this works, but you know, as with all live demos, something will probably go wrong, so I apologize. And there you go. So it's the second dimension I called. So I called it visits 2, I output it there. And so in this case, overview. So in this case, the number of entrances is also equal to the number of visits. So that's why in this sample we used entrances as visits. But you could have also pulled the visits metric and used that information under visits. Okay. So hopefully seeing this code, you can see that it's fairly straightforward. I have another example in here, but I'm going to skip over it because I see a lot of people are getting hot and sweaty, and it's not because of Google Analytics. So I want to skim over it very quickly. I'll let you play. You'll get a copy of these slides so you can go through this demo on your own. But the problem they were trying to solve, it was a blog. Down the side they had a roll of all their popular posts. But the orders of the links were like manually curated. The webmaster would determine what order the links would go in. But they were thinking, well, maybe there are actually some other products or other articles we have that are a lot more popular. I'd love to order my links in the order of popularity, so everybody gets to see my most popular articles first. So what they actually did, I mean, they could have probably put something in their CMS to track who's clicking on which articles, but they decided to use Google Analytics instead. And what they essentially did was use Google Analytics to track which links were being clicked on, then pull the data from Google Analytics, take it into their CMS, and then when they actually output the links, they ordered the links by the total number of clicks the link received. And then, so what they got was, instead of just a whole bunch of links in a random order or maybe published date order, they got links ordered by the total number of clicks. And so hopefully floating up to the top of the list all their popular articles, which obviously people found popular for a reason, so hopefully they're exposing more readers to their stronger content. So if you're a developer, I'd just say start developing today. We've already got libraries that have customized libraries for analytics in JavaScript, Java, and even the raw HTTP protocol if you want to get really uber geeky and work with the raw protocol there. And then we also have our generalized G data libraries for .NET and Python, and those also have elements in there specific to Google Analytics. So these libraries also contain libraries for like spreadsheets, Blogger, Calendar, and so on, and there's an analytics element too. Is anyone here going to start writing analytics apps straight away? A couple of people, all right. So as you're writing these apps, if you create anything that's really cool or you think would be really useful, we actually opened up a Google Analytics app gallery as well, because we found a lot of people were doing some interesting stuff with it. For example, you'll see here there's a category of phone call tracking. So people found interesting ways to track a lead from a website where somebody rang you up, and then if they closed the deal over the phone, they could mimic a GIF hit on behalf of that user from the call center back to analytics to say, hey, this visitor just closed the deal, so that's the goal met. So there's some pretty cool things you can do, and you can basically extend the Google Analytics from what it is now. It's a really powerful tool, but I know like the audience at SG-GTUG, you guys want to do even cooler stuff. You want to find out what makes the system work, try and break the system. So the API allows you to do that and try out different things. If you create anything useful, feel free to click on Add Your Application here and describe your app and show it off. I'm also looking for like pretty cool examples from Singapore. So if you ever create anything, feel free to drop me a line, and I'd love to have a look at it and even maybe feature it in future talks as well. So that, resources. So look, I've gone through a lot of stuff here very quickly. I don't expect you to remember it all. So there's a lot of information online for you. First off, if you want to learn how to use Google Analytics, what it's all about, we have free online courses at conversionuniversity.com. If you're a novice, these videos take you about 8 hours to complete. If you're fairly okay with metrics, dimensions, analytics, it probably takes you about 3 hours to go through them very quickly because you can skip over the boring parts. But these are all exciting. There are no boring parts at all. And then if you want, you can actually sign up to do an exam. And you, if you pass it, you become what's known as GAIQ qualified. So Google Analytics Individual Qualification. And you get a nice certificate to print out, frame it, put it up on your wall, or you can even take it to your boss and say, maybe it's time for a raise. Everything I've touched upon today is at these links. We have a help center, we have our Google Code site, which is the more technical documentation. We have a number of blogs as well. So we have a blog that's specific to, oops. Sorry. We have a blog that's specific to Southeast Asia, and then we also have a blog that's general Google Analytics as well. And we're also working on creating like an Asia-Pacific Analytics blog as well to sort of feature work that's being done out in this part of the world. So hopefully some of your apps would get on there as well. So subscribe to these blogs. Anything new, anything cool, they come out here first, and you'll hear about them first. And then on Twitter as well, we have a Google Analytics user that you should follow as well. Okay, so that's all from me. I think I just want to let you guys cool down. I know it's getting hot, so I don't want to keep talking. Any questions before we move on? Otherwise, I'm here for about another hour as well if you want.